Continuing our discussion on the bureaucracy in the Office of Personnel Management. Personal attributes of a member of bureaucrats and higher civil servants are usually elitist, middle-aged, white males. More times than often, they have at least a master's degree. They're more liberal than the average citizen because, as you've learned in political culture, the higher your education is, the more likely you are to be liberal, because these bureaucrats and these more activist agencies want to bypass Congress, want to bypass the executive branch in order to get changes made as far as what they consider to be the best type of change. Oftentimes, these more liberal bureaucracies have a mission statement that their organization members share a common view of an agency's purpose and methods. As a result, they're easier to manage because they're focused, but oftentimes they're entrenched and they're more difficult to change as time goes on. External forces that work on bureaucracies, you have executive superiors higher up the food chain within the executive branch who expect that below them that bureaucrats are going to do what they're supposed to do. White House staff that want bureaucracies to implement policies that make their president look good. Congressional committees that want to be able to control bureaucracies with oversight. Interest groups that want to move in and lobby bureaucracies so that they get policies implemented, which they're interested in. Media that wants to get in to dig to the root of how policies are actually implemented. The courts, who look at bureaucracies as a means of regulation and to try to get, especially an activist court, to bypass Congress, and rival agencies that are constantly cutting each other up because they're little turf wars between bureaucracies. External forces include what's called the Iron Triangle because agencies and committees and interest groups are captured with one another. The agency is captured by congressional committees that want to be able to get policies implemented to their way of thinking, and interest groups that are going to work on agencies and committees to get policies for their particular groups that want to see policy implemented to change as a means by which to show this interest group that they're getting policies implemented. Oftentimes at the state and local level, issue networks instead of iron triangles are a better explanation. Going back to our points earlier in the semester on pluralism, whereby you have issue groups, interest groups that are working, competing against one another to see what kind of policies they can get implemented by the government. Not any one particular issue network is more important than the other, and as a result, you have never-ending competition. Congress does provide oversight of bureaucracies. Only Congress can authorize money. Sometimes, like with the Environmental Protection Agency or Securities and Exchange Commission, the Health Department, with Medicare and Medicaid, you're going to have permanent monies that are going to be authorized. More than likely, what you have are annual authorizations of money. That's a way that Congress can keep bureaucracies on the string, keep bureaucrats controlled by the purse strings, as a means by with annual salaries, you never know how much money they're going to have, so they're constantly having to beg for more money from Congress. That appropriation of money is oftentimes for that particular purpose. Congress will authorize less than the original policy authorization. When they appropriate less, it just means that, okay, we have a little extra money. If you want to continue operations we'll release this money to you under our guidelines. For a while, there was a means by which the legislative veto could happen. The Federal Trade Commission was an example back in the 1980s. The legislative veto was intended to delegate broad authority to executive branch while allowing Congress to block authority in particular cases by resolution. In the Chadha case in 1983, the Supreme Court ruled that the legislative veto was unconstitutional. Only the executive branch has the means by which to veto policy implementation. Congress makes law. It cannot get involved in making executive decisions about how policies are being implemented. Congressional investigations continue to are the power comes from the constitutional power to legislate. So they must have the ability to investigate how their laws are being implemented. Those investigations cannot deprive individual rights or expose personal affairs of bureaucrats, but they can investigate how the people's money is being spent. It's meant to be a check on agency discretion, making sure that they're implementing policy according to congressional law. Of course, there are pathologies, there are problems with bureaucracies. Red tape is complex and sometimes conflicting rules among agencies. Any of you that have ever been to Department of Motor Vehicles can see red tape sometimes at its best, the amount of paperwork that's involved. At Department of Motor Vehicles, at Department of Family Services, those types of agencies that require so much paperwork. It's mind-boggling sometimes. Conflict, agencies that work at cross purposes with one another. As a bureaucrat in Uinta County, I can give you an example as far as duplication. It's part of my job to make sure that agencies that provide human services don't step on each other, don't duplicate their particular policies, because duplication is a waste of money. Imperialism is when empire builders try to build huge bureaucracies regardless of the benefits and the cost of the programs. So you always have to try to stay away from empire building and bureaucracies. And of course, what we all try to do is cut down waste, spending more than necessary to buy a product or a service from the government. So be it that you've had for about the last 15 years the idea under the National Performance Review to reinvent government, to run government more like a business. You borrow business standards, you cut red tape, you put customers first, you empower employees that are trying to implement policy. That would all be more efficient. But the problem is government is not a business. You cannot fire employees at will. Once they're in the civil service, you can't get rid of them except for cause. There's no profits in government. Governments have to follow congressional dictates, and they're elected officials who are very concerned about how they're going to get reelected. This is all a problem with the bureaucracies, and will continue to try to cut down on waste, make government more efficient, and everything will be hunky-dory.